Chapter 16. A Luna Moth. Bringing in the protein formula the next afternoon with Yu-Yan, Amy was feeling grateful that she had been asked to be a nurse. She had now given 2 positive morning reports to the professor, and he had happily passed on the news. The young nurse didn't know about Twitter and Instagram, but they were lighting up with reposts across the social media chain, with thousands of likes and loves piling up. So many people across the world were hoping the burn victims would pull through. Kenzie came running up the stairs to check on the patients, and he stayed to help. Ponzi and Zahir had been sleeping on and off all morning, and now they needed their pain medication and antibiotics. While Kenzie measured the doses into cups and the girls gave them out, Amy began humming a tune. "It's the lady in white," Ponzi teased, who had taken to calling her this ever since the night of the fever. Bringing Uncle Louis his special formula, Amy noticed he was lying on his side reading one of his new books, the biggest book, which he had propped up against the window seat. "Are you going to read it to us?" she asked him curiously. "At some point," he said quietly, aware that Yu-Yan was still in the room and the professor had limited the investigation to a specific 5. Amy continued to hum her catchy melody. All the patients now readily accepted their portions, and no longer did they have to force anyone to drink. Kenzie placed wet cloths on all the bandages so they would be easier to remove. He brought in some clean wipes for the girls to use and picked up the bottles of medicine to take back out to the hallway. Sitting down to unwrap the moistened gauze on Zahir's lower leg, Amy added some words to her tune.
"A little medicine here, a little formula there. We'll put on some ointment and wrap you with care."
Zahir laughed and then winced as the gauze came away from a sensitive spot. "I'm sorry," Amy apologized. Ponzi vocally expressed his pain as Yu-Yan was a little too hasty with one bandage. "You'll wrap us with care," he called out. "What about the unwrapping? That's what hurts the most." Yu-Yan gave him a look of reproach. "I'm trying my best," she exclaimed. "Be glad it's not me," Kenzie called out cheerily as he brought in the ointment and clean gauze for each of the nurses. The night before, he had tried to help remove the dressings, and Ponzi had overreacted numerous times. "Yeah, you are definitely the worst," Ponzi teased. "But it was your first try, I'll give you that." Laughing, Amy picked up a sterile saline wipe and began to dab the long weeping wound on her patient's lower leg. Continuing with her song, she added,
"You go out of here feeling all brand new, 'cause here is where we love to look after you."
Zahir looked over at Ponzi with a wry smile. "Is this the White Lady's song?" he asked. No, Ponzi replied, shaking his head. "There was some line about hoping you would always stay alive." "One day you'll sing that song again, right?" Zahir encouraged. "It's too bad that you only dreamed about being fried for dinner," Amy bantered, applying the ointment. "It was your friend who dreamt about the lady in white." Zahir looked perplexed. Amy felt that was just as well, since Zahir was still George's claim. She took off the bandages on his arm. Underneath, yellow pus oozed out around the newly formed scab. It smelled bad. Her face wrinkled instantly. Raising his head from the pillow, Zahir looked at the sore with a look of disgust. "I feel so sorry for you," he remarked dismally, as Amy wiped the pus away. "This is such a gross job. You must wish that you could go back to working in the kitchen. I wouldn't want to be assigned to this messy, smelly work." "Don't feel sorry for me," she protested earnestly. "I wouldn't trade jobs with anyone." Raising his head, Zahir frowned. "Really? Why not?" There were at least 2 reasons that Amy could have given. One was safe and easy to say, and one was quite difficult in a crowded room where a revoked rule still held sway in her mind, and she wasn't sure how her words would be received. She chose the safe remark. "I once caused the loss of life," she reflected sadly, thinking of Rosa. "And now I've found a way to save lives. This means way more to me than cooking food." With a shrug, Zahir lay back on his pillow and closed his eyes. "We all need to eat to live," he replied flatly. "Cooking food is also an important way to keep people alive." Amy looked up from the wound and smiled, but Zahir's eyes were closed. Kenzie picked up the bottles of medicine to take back to the hallway. "You could ask Kenzie to do this messy part," Zahir murmured. Amy stopped what she was doing and looked up with a tragic expression. Opening his eyes, Zahir saw the look. Or not, he relented. You're doing a great job, Amy. I just feel badly for you. I'm rotting. A pale green moth flew through the window. A cat bounded in with its eyes on the moth. No one had noticed that Mia was so close by. Oh, no you don't, Amy called out, trying to catch the cat. No killing in here. The cat jumped on Zahir's bed. Uncle Louis called out instantly, warning of cat scratches and infection to uncovered wounds. Zahir was quick to react, trying to avoid the cat's paws. Kenzie sat the medicine bottle down and dashed in, scooping Mia up in his arms before she could walk on any of Zahir's open sores. With haste, he took the animal outside and ran down the hill for another shower. As the patients relaxed, Amy cleaned everywhere the cat had touched. The moth found a resting place high on the wall. A Luna moth, Uncle Louis exulted, happy that it was resting near him. And this one is the right size. I loved my ride on the Luna moth, Amy recalled dreamily, coming back over to rub ointment on Zahir's wounds. The ring around his neck was almost healed. It was now a thin, strangely pinkish line. That night is one of my favorite memories. For a few minutes, everyone recalled the day, nearly 2 months ago, when the moths and butterflies had grown to a gigantic size. Amy had been the first to get the ride of her life. The twinkle lights that now hung in the crisis room window had attracted the moth at night. That was one incredible ride, Zahir murmured. Skimming over the water was exhilarating, like nothing I've ever done before or since. We were all so worried you were going to end up in the lake, Amy recalled. Zahir chuckled and then winced as Amy tried to gently remove the dead tissue from the oozing sore on his face. The long wound on his face was always the most sensitive. It was a little worrisome, he reflected, but that only added to the thrill. I wish I'd gotten on, Uncle Louis said. It did look fun. Me too, Ponzi added. Only I knew nothing about it. I didn't even see it happen. Chuckling, Uncle Louis said, You were likely deep in the North Forest. You can't see much when you're hiding away in dark dens. Yeah, Ponzi nodded ruefully. There are lots of things I wish I could change. Lots that I will change. Speaking more seriously, Uncle Louis asked, How does a moth begin life? Do you remember the book we read? As a baby moth? Ponzi suggested as Amy picked up the bottle of ointment nearby. Uncle Louis shook his head and gave them all a detailed description of the early developmental process. Trying hard not to flinch when Amy applied the ointment to his face, Zahir clarified, So caterpillars don't have wings? No, Uncle Louis replied. They don't look anything like a butterfly or a moth. Caterpillars are often quite ugly, but they change into these beautiful creatures through a process called metamorphosis. Remember this, it doesn't matter what we've done in our past. We can all be transformed into something better. Suddenly, the Luna moth flitted over and came to rest on Ponzi's arm. Amy stopped attending to her patient and stared in amazement. The moth fluttered its wings gently, but it didn't move. It was so close. Ponzi stayed as still as he could, restraining himself from hollering even when Yu Yan removed the wet gauze from his arm. All caterpillars do is eat, Uncle Louis told them as they marveled at the exotic creature. They eat and get bigger and bigger until they know it's time to change. Then they wrap themselves up in sticky thread cases called cocoons, and their bodies completely break down into a liquid substance. Over a number of days, that liquid substance is transformed into this gorgeous new creature with wings. It's almost like they die, and then they are brought back to life as something better, much, much better. Looking over, Amy noticed a peaceful look on Uncle Louis's face as he closed his eyes and leaned back on his pillow. That's remarkable, Zahir exclaimed, watching the Luna moth slowly flap its pale green wings. Amy nodded. I've never heard of one kind of creature turning into another. With a smile, Uncle Louis opened his eyes and nodded. When butterflies and moths are released into paradise, they have already gone through the caterpillar and metamorphosis stage. You don't see the ugly stage, you only see the beauty. The lovely pale green Luna moth flapped its wings harder and rose into the air, flew back out the window. Wow, was incredible, Ponzi marveled. I'm so glad it chose to land on me. For a moment, all the tinies watched the moth fly away until it was out of sight. Having finished caring for Zahir, Amy picked up her supplies and walked over to help Yu Yan. Uncle Louis, Zahir said with a little hesitation, did the professor find a way to make dead people come back to life? Glancing over curiously, Uncle Louis replied, No, he is not. But he brought you back to life, Ponzi pointed out. Then as Amy began to unwind the bandage on his leg, he suddenly wailed, Ouch! Ouch! That's stuck! Ow! That hurts! Be gentle! Amy looked over at Uncle Louis with a smile. She applied another wet cloth to the gauze and waited for the area to moisten. The professor didn't bring me back to life, Uncle Louis smiled. But Kenzie says you were dead, Zahir remarked slowly. Sitting down in the middle chair, Amy helped Yu Yan clean Ponzi's oozing sores. Trying her best to avoid causing pain to their very sensitive patient, Amy listened carefully. Uncle Louis glanced briefly over at Amy, and then he asked the dark-haired young man, Do you remember our first aid class, Zahir? With a short laugh, Zahir looked at Ponzi with amusement. The one where this guy helped you demonstrate? Ponzi smiled. Hey, I was so helpful that day. Nodding, Uncle Louis agreed. Yes, Ponzi, you were. It was one of your better days. What? Ponzi retorted, but then he laughed. I taught all of you CPR that day, Uncle Louis recalled. Amy listened and learned well. When I had a heart attack during the fire, Amy did what she needed to do, and she saved my life. With a quick gasp, Amy looked over. Was I breathing when you found me, Amy? Slowly, she shook her head. Did I have a pulse? She shook her head again. So, Uncle Louis deduced, I was technically dead. But Amy pumped my heart and breathed air into my lungs, and according to the doctor, I was already breathing again before I was put on the train. With a twinge of regret, Uncle Louis said, I never thanked you, Amy. I came back in here and there was so much happening that I've forgotten to tell you how grateful I am that you wanted to learn CPR. You learned well, and you came quickly to my rescue. Thank you, Amy. A pink flush spread over the young nurse's face. From the bed beside her chair, Zahir reached over and patted her back. Saving lives seems to be your thing, he said kindly. Thank you, Amy said, smiling with embarrassment. Needing a moment to herself, she gazed up at the clock. Oh, she said, it will soon be time for the protein formula. I'll just get it for everyone. Don't worry, Ponzi, I'll be right back. Hopping up, Amy rushed into the hallway where most of the bottles were kept. With one hand on the wall, she held onto her moon necklace while she tried to regain her composure. Hearing that she had saved Uncle Louis's life was overwhelming. Amy needed to come to terms with it all. She did recall that Uncle Louis had been breathing again before he was put on the stretcher, even though his eyes had stayed closed and he had remained unconscious. I can hardly believe that such a simple technique can save a life, she thought breathlessly. I'm so thankful that I helped Uncle Louis before anyone else. Then recalling George's insistent demand to care for Zahir, she admitted reluctantly, Perhaps I owe that one to her. In the room, she heard Zahir speak up. Thanks for saving my life, Uncle Louis. I would have been burned a lot worse if you hadn't rolled me over and put out the fire. Lima helped a great deal too, Uncle Louis recalled. I'm so thankful he acted quickly to drench you both with water. Amy heard Ponzi speak up. Well, since you're all talking about saving lives, he began hesitantly, but very sincerely. Zahir, thank you for saving mine. You're most welcome, Zahir replied. Coming back to the doorway, Amy looked in with a smile. Zahir's shining moon necklace still hung forlornly on his bedpost. I know most of the guys would have just let me go, Ponzi admitted, as Yu Yan finished unwrapping his wounds. I probably didn't deserve to be rescued, but thanks. Thanks for caring. Zahir reached over and gently punched Ponzi on his shoulder. I'm sure you would have done the same for me, he replied. Yeah, Ponzi nodded. Yeah, but he had nothing else to say. Tears welled up in Amy's eyes, and she had to stay in the hallway for a few moments longer, trying to wipe them away. When she finally returned to the room, she could hear Uncle Louis encouraging Ponzi to move his elbow and keep his scars flexible. It's so important to know how to care for people, she realized. And there are many ways to save a life. Chapter 17. Riding Waves. Out in the hallway, early the next morning, Amy picked up the pain medication. She heard a lot of commotion coming from the young man in George's room. When she peered in from the doorway, Lima and Damien were having an arm wrestle on one of the beds. Franz was cheering Lima on. Come on, he called out. You can beat him! Surprising Damien with a sudden burst of strength, Lima brought his friend's arm down. He and Franz whooped and hollered. 1 for you, Damien laughed. 3 for me. Amy stood in the doorway. I don't think any of you need pain medication this morning, she observed with a smile. Immediately, they all began to grimace in pain and looked like they were ready to faint. Aw, come on, beautiful nurse, Damien pleaded. We need a little more caring in this room. Holding out his hand, he begged, how about some kind attention here? Amy laughed and blushed against her will, but she didn't step forward. While the handsome Damien still had more of an effect on her than she liked to admit, she was now well aware that charming manners and dashing good looks weren't enough to build a happy, committed relationship. His luster had faded. Generally, Tina and Yu-Yan attended to the Beach Boys once Amy had given them their early morning pain medication, and she knew they would soon arrive. Looking at the healthy scabs the young men were eager to show her, she said, It looks to me like you're all ready to go back to the beach. But Uncle Louie needs to check. He might think differently. Yes, the beach! Lima cheered. Go-karting, surfing! We need to get out of this room! I don't know, Damien suddenly pondered with an impish grin, lying back lazily on the pillows. I'm kind of keen on beds. I didn't realize they were so comfortable. But it's not the same, Lima argued. You can hardly hear the water from here, or the loons. And the air isn't nearly so fresh. You definitely can't see the stars, Franz added, or feel free. I've been sleeping better in this bed than I ever did in a hammock, Damien responded, and I hear everything through the windows just fine. He turned to Amy with a smile. Do I have to be injured to stay in the caring center? Yes, you do, she said firmly. Georgia will want her room back eventually. He frowned and lifted his fingers toward its healing wounds. Maybe I'll have to scratch these itchy scabs. Don't you dare, Amy warned in a teasing fashion. You could get them infected. Exactly, he laughed. More meds, full service, and a soft bed. This is the good life. Tina and Yu-Yan's voices were coming through the windows. Your nurses will soon be here, Amy smiled, turning to leave. No pain medication for you. Then we definitely need some hand-holding, Damien teased. All the Beach Boys laughed. Amy was relieved to exit their room. As she walked down the hall, she overheard Zahir talking with Uncle Louie. She could hear distress in his voice. I don't think it's like that. Well, I don't have any experience with this, Uncle Louie was saying quietly, as she drew close to the doorway. And you can't really have a private conversation in this crowded room, but once you're out of here, you should talk, openly, honestly. Zahir groaned. The last time was brutal. Words aren't as meaningful as actions. I don't know, Uncle Louie, he responded dismally. I'm okay with the way things are. I'm a wreck. I hurt all over. I don't even like my own thoughts right now. I just can't deal with any more pain. I don't want to give it or take it. Realizing this was a private conversation, Amy began humming a tune so they would all know she was returning. She wondered who Zahir needed to talk to. What was the last time that was brutal? She asked herself. Is Zahir doubting George's love for him? The comments the beautiful blonde had made right after the fire were rather brutal, but they weren't the last. Perhaps he was more hurt when she said she wouldn't come in because of the smell. Defensively, she thought, poor Zahir. Walking into her old room with a bottle of pain medication and a spoon, Amy was surprised to see that Zahir was holding the large gray-striped cat. Still bandaged, his wounds weren't in danger of infection. Ponzi looked up at her wide-eyed. Mia is in here again? She complained in a teasing way. How long has she been here? All night, I guess, Zahir replied gravely, his eyes listless as he patted the cat. She was sleeping on me when I woke up.
Amy didn't admit to her own cat encounter. Cats are killers,
she remarked derisively, measuring out a spoonful of the pain medication.
Ever since her pet bird had been eaten by Ripple, Amy was distrustful of the whole species.
Cuddling it closer, Zahir disagreed. This one is very fluffy and warm. She wouldn't hurt a thing. She's huge, Amy argued merrily, giving Zahir his dosage. I'm sure she could take down a dog. Her patients laughed. Zahir's eyes brightened a little, and Amy smiled. Feel how soft she is, he said. She's a cat, Amy stated flatly, picking up some used bandages from the floor. She hunts small animals and birds. Plus, she's not supposed to be in here when you have open wounds. Listen to her purr, Zahir encouraged with a slight smile. Isn't that such a relaxing sound? I don't think Mia has ever killed anything, not squirrels or rabbits, certainly not dogs. Laughing, Amy couldn't resist the appeal. She reached out and patted the cat. Mia was soft, and she eased into the patting and purred even louder. Okay, Amy relented graciously. I'll like one cat, but only because she's still innocent. Picking her up, Amy added, but for now, she has to go back outside. Zahir looked forlorn when Amy took the cat. Taking her outside, she coaxed Mia to head back to the meadow. Then she walked back up the stairs and washed her hands carefully in the soapy water before re-entering the room. Later that afternoon, Georgia and Lily came in to read to the patients. With their hair still wet from the mandatory shower, the two girls dragged in the book and laid it against Poncy's bed. Georgia sat down in the chair in between the two patients. It smells better in here today, the pretty blonde girl observed happily. I can deal with this. Positioning herself close to the dark-haired patient, she said cheerfully, Oh, good. This chair is on the right side. Amy looked over with a quizzical expression. The chair was actually on the left side of Zahir. Lowering her head down to look at the patient from the level of the mattress, Georgia smiled. From here you look just like your old self, Zahir. Once all those scabs fall off, I'm sure you'll be right back to the way you were. Kenzie quickly walked out of the room. Amy glanced over to see a dark look cross Zahir's face. Sitting back up, Georgia looked curiously at Zahir. She leaned over and frowned. Is there something wrong with your eye? She asked. I hope not, he answered wearily. Suddenly alarmed, Amy drew closer. Which eye? She asked, and then she noticed the cloudiness. Zahir put his hand over his left eye and stared out the window with his right. There is a dark spot, he admitted despairingly. I keep hoping it will go away. Immediately, Uncle Louie and Amy wanted to know all the details. Kenzie came back in and listened carefully as Zahir explained that he had just started noticing a small dark spot in his vision. It looks kind of weird, Georgia stated in a matter-of-fact way. I can't believe no one else has noticed, she added with a reproachful glance in Amy's direction. The thought that Zahir might have another injury and more pain to endure distressed Amy greatly. She couldn't bear George's blunt assessments of her patient, or the implication that the nurses weren't doing a good job. On the verge of tears, she rebuked her housemate sharply. How can you say that? Zahir has enough to deal with. He doesn't need to be told that his eye looks weird. That's just mean. It's okay, Amy, her patient pleaded. You all need to be completely honest with me. Just tell me the truth. It was one thing to deal with George's taunts and the heart-wrenching news that Zahir had another injury, but to have her favorite patient imply that she wasn't being honest added to the hurt. Folding her arms across her chest, the young nurse's face flushed red. I wish you had listened to me, Zahir, Georgia protested regretfully. You should never have gone into that fire. Zahir swallowed hard and closed his eyes. Amy, Uncle Louie called out sharply before the copper-haired nurse could react. Come here, I want to show you something. Walking indignantly to the other end of the room, Amy heard Kenzie lash out. If he had listened to you, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself now, and that would be worse. Ignoring the remark, Georgia began telling the patients that she'd found a new, exciting adventure to read. No one replied. Reaching the elder Tiny's bedside, Amy looked back to see Georgia ruffling Zahir's dark curly hair. "Come on, Zahir, don't look so serious," the tall blonde teased as she picked up his hand. "I'm here with you," she laughed. "I love you regardless of how you look. Come on," she coaxed. "Where's your smile?" "What are we reading about?" Zahir asked flatly. "It's all about a boy who was stranded on the ocean for many days," she told him excitedly. "He escaped from a burning ship with a very large dog. It's kind of like our flood and fire experiences mixed in together." Georgia began reading. Lily held Poncy's hand and listened. Uncle Louis had his own big book open. He pointed eagerly to some of the words, and Amy knelt down beside him and read them silently. She didn't know who had written the book or who was giving the message. All she knew was that the words had a quiet, calming effect on her distressed and resentful heart. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you. And from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. As you wish that others would do to you, so do to them. She reread the words a few times to herself as Uncle Louis stroked her hair gently. "There's a better way," he whispered. "What is this book?" she begged curiously. "I'm going to tell you soon, very soon," he replied quietly. "But I thought you needed this now." He smiled and whispered, "Remember, as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them." Nodding glumly, Amy looked up at Uncle Louis. Had she followed his advice earlier, she wouldn't have said things in the past that she regretted. She recognized that having an angry tiff with Georgia in front of Zahir was not going to make anyone feel better. She sighed and patted his arm. "Okay," she agreed. Amy could not have explained the calming effect of the words she had just read. Had the French psychologist observed the interchange from the other side of the dome, she might have pointed out to Jacques Lemans that this was a step toward the state of well-being. Don't just listen to yourself. Talk to yourself. Instead of allowing her to be tossed to and fro with turbulent emotions and distorted views, Uncle Louis had encouraged her to master powerful feelings with guiding principles. Seeing that Kenzie had started cleaning the floors, Amy got up to organize the supplies. As the others listened to Georgia's story, she looked out at the tumultuous lake and thought to herself, maybe my feelings are like those waves. Some are good and fun to ride, and some are just destructive to everyone. She recalled how the surfers had called Odin a rolling tumbler, a wave that looked good but tossed them hard, head first, and left them feeling regret and despair. As she took out the empty bottles of medicine and placed them by the stairs, she reflected unhappily, and they called me a whoosh, and well, sometimes I do fizzle out way too soon. In the hallway, she tucked all the used bandages into the pots to be taken out to the train. Picking up the jar of washing water, she took it outside to dump it on the grass. Fahid had brought in a clean supply that morning. Marching back up the stairs, she thought, there are waves that aren't worth catching, like today. Jealousy, resentment. I'm glad Uncle Louis stopped me before I said things that would have made everyone upset. Maybe those are rolling tumblers. Coming back into the caring center, the young nurse looked out the big windows to see a smooth, glassy wave holding its peak all the way in. The Beach Boys would like that one, she thought. With a smile, she remembered the thrill of riding a good wave in, even though she had only ever caught them near shore. Glancing over at the 3 patients in the room who were doing so much better and recovering well, she held up her head and told herself, and then there are some waves, like compassion and love, that can give us the power to help others in wonderful ways. Those are the waves that bring joy. Dia brought in clean blankets and took out the used bedding. Vahid walked up the stairs bringing another pot of fresh water and taking out the used supplies. He had volunteered to take over Odin's job. Tina and Yu Yan stretched out in the spare bed, enjoying the story. At the far end of the room, Uncle Louis was still facing the window reading his new book. Sweeping the floor, Amy was intrigued, wondering what other wise words of advice the book might hold. The older man was deeply absorbed in it for hours on end. When was he going to share it with all of them, and why was he waiting? Mia popped back in through the window and headed for Zahir. Since all the open wounds were covered back up, Uncle Louis wasn't concerned. "Just don't let her touch your face," he warned, as a cat curled up on the young man's chest and looked up at him contentedly. While Georgia continued reading, loud purrs reverberated through the room as the scarred patient stroked the animal's head. Still not completely ready to forgive killer cats, Amy did love to hear them purring. The words that Uncle Louis had pointed out to her began to affect her conscience. The recognition that she wanted to ride waves of compassion and love began to make an impact. Amy had never made amends for telling Georgia that she hated her. As the minutes ticked by, the copper-haired nurse realized there was a better way, a way that might help make peace and please Uncle Louis. When Georgia reached the end of the chapter and paused to turn the page, Amy was standing nearby. In a pleasant tone, she spoke up. "I just want to say thank you for telling us about Zahir's eye," she said kindly. "Now we'll know to watch it carefully. Maybe there is something we can do to help him." The blonde-haired storyteller looked up in surprise, without any appreciation for the gracious acknowledgement Amy had made. At that very moment, a loud shout came from across the hall. Franz had beaten Damien in chess and was celebrating his victory. "I'm so tired of being in here," they heard Damien call out despondently. "Sore loser," Lima teased. "Come on, you beat me all the time." Damien ran into the crisis room. "Uncle Louis," he begged desperately, "how much longer do we have to stay in here? I love the nights, but I hate the days. I want to surf. I need to get out of here." Rolling over, the older tiny asked to see his wounds. Remembering the advice Rachel had given him before he had returned to paradise, Uncle Louis was pleased to see dry scabs. With a smile, he said, "You can leave, as long as you keep yourselves clean. But no surfing until those scabs come off, which might take a couple more days. If you're in the water for too long, they will get soft and you may get an infection. And if you have any bleeding or pus, you need to come back and have the nurses check you over." "So we're free to go, night and day?" "You are, as long as you're careful." "He said no surfing," Franz complained. "Just a couple more days," Damien clarified. "There are other things we can do." Leaping up, he shouted out joyfully, "Let's go! Rose's Hill, here I come!" Uncle Louis frowned. Maybe that's not a good idea either just yet. You might scrape those wounds and get dirt in them." "Come on, Uncle Louis," Damien argued. "We've never fallen out of the go-karts. We'll drive carefully." Looking over at the girls, he said, "Hey, why don't you all take a break and come with us?" Still holding Zahir's hand, Georgia looked up with interest. "I'm reading right now," she replied, "but I'll come after dinner tonight." "Me too," Lily smiled. "I haven't done anything fun for so long." Ponzi pouted, but Lily didn't notice. Lima and Franz were standing in the doorway looking in with eager anticipation. Damien extended the invitation to Tina and Yuyan, and they agreed to come. It had been nearly a week since the fire when all their regular activities had ceased. Dia appeared with an armful of clean bedsheets and a new pair of swim shorts for Damien, since his other ones had been singed. "Let's get Dia to come," Lima chuckled. Addressing the pretty dark-skinned girl, Damien said, "Dia, you don't know what you're missing. You sit in here sewing all day and you never have any fun. You got to try it. Pick any one of us for your driver and we'll give you the best ride." It was actually the first time anyone had put pressure on Dia to join in. She was always so committed to sewing, with so many orders to fill, that no one thought of encouraging her to participate. Looking up with a pleased expression, Dia said, "I wouldn't mind trying it, as long as I have a safe driver." "Pick me or Lima," Damien suggested with a mocking glance in Franz's direction. "Franz is only one speed, and it's way too fast." An argument ensued, but eventually Dia said she would try all three and see who she thought was the best. Looking over at Amy, stacking the bed sheets in a neat pile on the couch, Damien smiled. "What about you, Nurse Amy? You need to do something exciting, too. You must be bored out of your mind in here. I know you're not afraid of go-karting anymore. Why don't you join us after dinner?" Amy shook her head. Thanks for asking, she replied evenly, but I have lots to do in here. In all truthfulness, the crisis room was exactly where she wanted to be. Everyone but the whoosh, then, Damien grumbled. Well, that's fine. See you girls after dinner. I'm out of here. Hollering excitedly, the Beach Boys exited the caring center. Don't listen to his names, Zahir mumbled, as Georgia turned the page for the next chapter. Don't let it bother you. Amy looked up appreciatively as she collected the dirty dishes, but deep inside the name did bother her. There's some truth to it, she sighed, setting the bowls down in the hallway for the kitchen crew to take back. Georgia spoke up. Damien isn't trying to be mean, she said defensively. He makes up names just like you sing songs. He calls me Giorgio, she giggled. Zahir prodded. Amy, what do you mean there's truth to it? She explained. A whoosh is a wave that fizzles out just when you think it's going to be good. With a shrug, she admitted, sometimes I give up too soon. You are afraid of a lot of things, her blonde housemaid agreed. Zahir frowned, and Amy held her tongue. Rolling over in his bed, Uncle Louis gave Amy a smile of encouragement. Seeing that Tina and Yu Yan were looking bored, he addressed them, saying, You girls have done an excellent job caring for everyone. With the Beach Boys leaving, I think it'll be best if you resume normal life and are available outside for any other injuries. Kenzie and Amy can handle the rest of us in here from now on. Looking up gratefully, Kenzie smiled. Tina and Yu Yan didn't wait for the story to be over. They were happy to leave. Georgia began the next chapter, but seeing the patients were struggling to stay awake, she excused herself to go make dinner. There's so much work in that kitchen every day, she complained. Glancing in Amy's direction, she taunted, I'll be so glad when you go back to your old job. I haven't had any time to work on my books or my paintings. Amy nodded, but she didn't commit. For now, she was very happy with her new assignment. Standing up, Georgia begged Uncle Louis, Can I please have my room back tonight? It's not needed anymore, right? Kenzie looked over at Amy. Want to help me switch the beds around? He asked. The copper-haired girl nodded, and the two nurses headed off to clean up Georgia's room. Leaving the adventure book behind in the hall, the tall blonde said a loving goodbye to the sleepy Zahir and ran off to collect food from the garden. It was nap time in the caring center. Chapter 18. Treats. 2 hours later, the 3 extra beds that were no longer needed had been stored neatly in a spare room downstairs. The sheets were washed and hung to dry, and George's bed was back in its former position. The caring center now consisted of 1 room, 2 nurses, 3 patients, and the occasional cat. Peeking into the room and seeing that nap time was over, Amy sat down on the couch. Mia was purring on Zahir's chest, Ponzi was exercising his elbows, and Uncle Louis was once again on his side facing the window. It looked like he was asleep until his arm moved to turn pages in the big book. Lately, it was his favorite position. Eager for some conversation, she asked her patients, What do you want to do the most when you're all better? Fishing, Zahir replied instantly. I miss early morning fishing. Ponzi laughed. Lily says we're getting married. Sounds like a great plan to me. Plans are good, Zahir agreed as he stroked Mia's soft fur with his good arm. We need some sort of purpose for life. Otherwise, every day just comes and goes, and before we know it, our lives will be over. Uncle Louis looked up with interest. What kind of a plan do you have in mind, Zahir? I don't know, he sighed. It just seems like there should be something more. I don't really know what's missing. Looking over with empathy, Amy saw the dark brooding look in his dull blue eyes. Something was bothering him. She didn't know what it was or how to ask. I might have a purpose for you, Uncle Louis told him. Really? Zahir looked up with interest. I'm going to tell you about it tonight after dinner, he promised. Ponzi had been thinking about his own plans, and he piped up dreamily, I'd like to make the North Forest a place that everyone can enjoy. That's a grand vision, Uncle Louis encouraged. What do you have in mind? I think I'll call it the fun forest, he replied happily. I'd like to have rope swings and bridges in between the trees. I want the girls to enjoy it as much as the guys. What do you think, Amy? He asked. Would you come if we built swings and had bridges to walk on? That sounds like fun, she agreed. As they discussed other ways to change the North Forest into an activity center for girls and guys, they heard a loud series of crashes in the distance. What was that? They all asked. Something fell over, Ponzi said. Amy told him about the tree outside Lily's room. Maybe Odin is taking down some of the burnt trees, Ponzi suggested. Satisfied with his suggestion, Uncle Louis was giving some tips on how to support the tree bridges when Santa and Lima came up the stairs with dinner. Look what we're having today, Santa exclaimed, giggling merrily. There was a plate of fried fish in her hands. Zahir's face lit up. I caught it myself, Lima boasted, carrying the other plates, and Georgia fried it. She's getting really good in that kitchen. Thank you, Zahir said with delight, as Santa handed him a plateful. I've been dreaming of fried fish. And there are more treats, Santa laughed, as they divvied out the fish to everyone. Georgia decided to put strawberries in the salad, and it's good. You're going to love it. Yes, Lima cheered, bringing in the bowls of salad, and Lily mixed some oil and honey together and sprinkled it all over, and it is tasty. Clapping his hands together and making his limbs move in ways that he and Santa had perfected, Lima danced around the room. This fish is amazing, Zahir exclaimed, savoring the tasty morsels. He glanced over at Lima. You have no idea how much I appreciate this. Or maybe I do, the tall black tiny laughed. I'm not so sure about strawberries, Ponzi grimaced, looking at his bowlful. But if Lily was in on this, then I guess I'd better like it too, he chuckled. After 2 painful arm movements, he groaned, it hurts so much to feed myself. Amy came over to help Ponzi eat, even as Uncle Louis reminded him about the importance of moving his arms often while his wounds healed. I'll do one, you do one, Amy suggested, bringing a forkful of salad to his mouth. With a groan, Ponzi munched on the salad and took the fork to slowly pick up the next mouthful. Lima sat down to talk to his friends and inquire about their injuries. Having not had the opportunity to tell him before, they both thanked him profusely for the buckets of water that he dumped on them in the fire. Without him, they knew their injuries would have been much worse. With a smile, Lima appreciated their gratitude. They shared recollections of the ordeal for a while. When there was a break in the conversation, Santa looked over at Amy excitedly, clapped her hands together, and said, Guess what? Today when the train came in, guess what was on it? As Amy helped Ponzi with his meal, she tried to think of things, but nothing she suggested was correct. Lots of birds, her friend laughed, clapping her hands together and wiggling her hips. Lots of them! So many lorikeys that I couldn't count them all, and bluebirds and cardinals. With excitement, Amy looked out the window. In the sky, she could see colorful birds flying around the orchards. Flocks of birds. Yes, she cried out joyfully. Oh, I'm so glad. And rabbits, Lima chuckled. 5 new little rabbits. And lots of butterflies, bees, and fireflies. There are even 2 more bats since the others completely disappeared. Can't miss mango blooming season. Ponzi had finished his salad, so Amy ran over to give Santa a hug of joy. I miss you, Santa exclaimed, hugging her back. I hardly see you anymore. I miss you too, Amy replied. I will personally ensure that all the cats have collars, Santa promised her friend. We don't want any more dead birds. Zahir plucked Mia's collar. The bell tinkled. Mia's good, he announced. Uncle Louis was laughing. Amy, he smiled, I want you to take a well-deserved break. Go feed the animals with your friends and see what is new. There'll be time to fix up your patients when you get back. Really? Amy said, looking all around. But it's almost time to change the bandages. Zahir had his mouth full of salad, but he nodded in agreement, and Ponzi said he would be fine till she had returned. When Zahir had swallowed, he encouraged, Go have fun, and then you can tell us all about it. With an affectionate chuckle, he added, But please come back. We need you. Flashing a grateful smile in Zahir's direction, Amy ran outside with Santa and Lima. She spent a glorious hour spotting new birds in the trees and finding baby rabbits at the compost pile. Lima helped her bring back a carry cart of compost treats for the deer and squirrels on Rainbow Hill, while Santa chatted about all the goings-on. It had been well over a week since she had last fed the animals. Her friends took a seat on the bench swing to watch the deer finish off their treats, while Amy quickly showered and changed her clothes. Re-entering the caring center, she gave a glowing report to her restless patients. Chapter 19. The New Books. After only a few rounds of go-karting that evening, Kenzie returned early to see how the patients were faring. Still a little wet from his shower, water droplets glistened in his brown curly hair. With at least 2 to 3 showers a day, the nurses had never been so clean. Looking around, Uncle Louis was pleased to see that the 4 tinies in the room were the exact group the professor had suggested could take part in the investigation. He was confident that all the other tinies were enjoying evening activities and wouldn't be back until dark. They had at least 2 precious hours. "Take a seat, Kenzie," he encouraged. "I have something to share with the 4 of you." Kenzie looked over at Amy, who was sitting on the couch. She patted the seat next to her. "There's room," she smiled. When everyone was settled and looking at him expectantly, Uncle Louis began, "I have 2 new books that I am allowed to only read with the 4 of you. We have a mission to sort out truth from error, so that we can then share truth with the others here in paradise. The professor has reluctantly given the 5 of us permission to investigate, but that's all. For now, we will keep this a secret and read only when we are alone together. Is everyone okay with that?" "This is a good time to do it," Kenzie nodded enthusiastically. "Evenings are a fun time for the others, at least until it gets dark. No one else will be here but us." "And the days are lengthening," Uncle Louis replied, looking up at the new clock on the wall. "It's been light until 8:30 lately." Looking over at Kenzie and Amy, Uncle Louis asked, "You both don't mind staying here in the evenings and missing out on all the fun?" Kenzie and Amy shared glances and nodded eagerly. A secret mission was exciting to at least 4 in the room. Amy was already intrigued by the new book. Ponzi sighed. "Is this like school?" "Don't worry," Uncle Louis assured him. "It is like school, but I won't be upset if you fall asleep." "Good," Ponzi sighed, "because I'm way too tired for school." "What is it about?" Amy begged, eager to begin. Having the attention of the others, Uncle Louis asked, "Have you ever thought about where life came from?" "The mastermind of paradise," Amy answered, frowning just a little. "The professor made us, didn't he?" Kenzie asked. Uncle Louis looked at them steadily. "This is our mission," he said. "We need to find out who or what made us. The answer to this question greatly impacts our sense of purpose, our morality, and our hope for life after death." "Is there life after death?" Zahir inquired earnestly. Uncle Louis saw the angst in the questioner's blue eyes. He quickly pondered that of the 5 tinies in the crisis room, only 1 was without a near-death experience. Rather than reply directly, he said, "I have 2 books. One tells us that we are alive by chance. All the plants, animals, and people that we see here in paradise were randomly generated with no purpose or design. It all just happened without a plan or a planner." "But that doesn't make sense," Zahir interrupted. "Obviously, the professor designed us very well." Pausing for a moment, the older tiny answered slowly, "The book that I'm telling you about was written by the professor. You see, the professor didn't make us. He only made our lives possible by taking life from his world and miniaturizing it. He believes that everything in his world happened through wonderful coincidence, even though he knows how much research and thought he put into building paradise." Wide eyes looked over at Uncle Louis with astonishment, and then disappointment set in as they realized the implications. "But if life just happened by chance, then it's not likely we can get it back," Amy reasoned sadly. "Who would give it to us?" "Yes," Kenzie agreed. With astonishment, he asked, Why did the professor miniaturize us? He feels paradise is a much happier place to live than in his own world, Uncle Louis replied. But if the professor had to work so hard to make paradise, Zahir reflected, still considering the issue, then someone had to make the professor's world. Uncle Louis smiled. So the other book I have was written by a being called God, who claims he made the professor's world, the landforms, the universe, and all life, the people, the animals, the birds, the plants, everything. He also promises that he can bring us back to life if we die. God? Zahir questioned, his good eye lighting up. Well, that sounds more hopeful. Why have we never heard of God before? That's a question we will need to answer, Uncle Louis acknowledged. But first we need to read both books and sort out which one holds the truth. The professor is okay with this? Amy clarified nervously. Somewhat, Uncle Louis nodded. He has agreed to this, reluctantly. That's why he wants us to keep this discussion private until we've made a decision about which one is true. They all nodded, but Ponzi was already drifting off to sleep. All right, Uncle Louis said. Which book should we start with? Everyone voted for the one that involved a purposeful designer and a hope for life after death. Uncle Louis asked Amy to read the first chapter. In the beginning, she read, God created the heaven and the earth. What is the earth? She asked. Uncle Louis had explored many of the chapters in Genesis and the Gospel accounts before the fire. From what he'd seen on the internet, he was able to explain that the earth was the big world, an enormous round ball with large bodies of water and vast expanses of land. He told them that the whole sphere floated in dark space. Paradise was only a tiny speck, situated on the huge planet Earth. Ponzi piped up drowsily. Hey, you're finally telling us about the big world. Maybe you don't want to fall asleep just yet, Uncle Louis chuckled. No way. I'm wide awake now, Ponzi insisted, sitting up in his bed. Amy read on. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, Let there be light. And there was light. Astounded, Amy blurted out, Did this God just speak words and it happened? How powerful is he? Is this for real? That's what we have to determine, Uncle Louis smiled. Excited, Amy read on and on. They discovered that the dry land was called Earth, and that God claimed to have made all the plants and trees. Then she read, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. It was an astonishing thought. People are made in the image of God, she exclaimed. He has made us like him? Kenzie pondered the idea. If Finitha used clay to make the image of a sunflower, then it would look like a sunflower, right? It would indeed, Kenzie, Uncle Louis nodded. Then do we look like God? What do you think, everyone? Well, Amy pondered as the setting sun began to cast rays of light into the room. If this book is true, then it sounds like it's telling us that we must look like the one who made us. Tingling with excitement, she said, We wouldn't survive without the professor looking after us. So maybe God looks after his world in the same way. Maybe this God is the mastermind of the professor's world and the professor doesn't even know it. Uncle Louis nodded. It's worth an investigation, isn't it? I don't know, Ponzi remarked wearily. If the professor doesn't believe in God, then why should we? That's a good question, Uncle Louis acknowledged. Zahir was troubled. But you say the professor is a very intelligent man, so why wouldn't he know if God is real or not? He challenged. This seems too important for him not to investigate thoroughly. That thought has kept me awake many nights, Zahir, Uncle Louis admitted wearily. So we are going to read the professor's book as well. He is certainly very intelligent and has had years of research and education, far beyond what any of us can ever hope for. And he is a good man whom I love dearly. However, the promises and the guidance that I read about in the Bible seem to be what I've been searching for. But if the professor says something is wrong, I am very hesitant to tell anyone otherwise. This is the reason I need all of you to help me decide what is true." Bewildered, Zahir looked over at Uncle Louis. "Have you not had anyone to talk to about this?" he asked compassionately. "No," Uncle Louis sighed heavily. "This has been a distressing and yet exhilarating discovery. I'm so thankful to be able to share it with the four of you." They read on to learn that God had made the first man from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Molded dust had been energized by God's Spirit, creating a living soul. "So it's God's breath of life that makes things come alive," Zahir considered. With a smile he asked, "Did he do CPR on us?" Uncle Louis chuckled. "There are some similarities," he considered. Amy, who was sitting beside the Bible, spoke up. "There are some notes written beside that verse," she said. "The first one says Job 34, verse 14 and 15. Uncle Louis pointed out the tags on the edge of the pages that marked each separate book by name. While Amy looked for the passage, the older man explained that the Bible was a collection of many books, penned by many writers, who all claimed to be recording the words of God. Finding the passage in Job, the copper-haired nurse read, "If he should set his heart to it, and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust." "So, this spirit can be given and taken away," Kenzie observed. He looked over at Uncle Louis. "And you say that God can give it back again?" "There are 4 more references in the margin," Amy piped up. Following the second penciled-in passage, she turned to Psalms 146 and read, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day his plans perish." Reading the comment scribbled in beside the verse, she added, "It says here that plans actually means thoughts." Zahir pondered. "That's like the reverse of Genesis chapter 2. We lose our breath, we go back to dust, and our thoughts end. Are there any more notes?" Amy followed the passages in order. The last one stirred excitement. John chapter 6 said, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day." "That's more like it," Zahir said excitedly, sitting up in bed. "We will be raised up on the last day, somehow. What is eternal life? When is the last day? Who is making this promise?" Uncle Louis answered 2 of his questions. Eternal life means never dying again. The person making this promise is Jesus, God's Son. He sighed, "This book is so big. I want to read it to you all at once. But I've also promised to read the professor's book." "We've got to read about Jesus," Zahir pleaded. "It sounds like he is the one who will give life back to us if we die." "Yes, we do need to read about Jesus," Uncle Louis agreed, "especially since he is now my new role model. I would encourage all of you to be like Jesus." Remembering Zahir had once said that he wanted to be like Uncle Louis, Amy looked up and caught her friend's eye. They shared a smile. Having already taken an hour reading God's book, Kenzie volunteered to read a chapter from the professors. After only 2 pages, everything they had just learned was turned upside down. Instead of a plan and a purpose, a designer and a guardian, the professor explained the universe had randomly come into being by chance explosions, fabulously incredible and very timely mutations, and the survival and reproduction of the fittest at the expense of the weak. It was a nasty beginning, with no care or concern for life or those with reduced capabilities, but a mad, amoral rush for the selfish betterment of each individual. Instead of portraying God as a merciful being who encourages everyone to rise to his level by caring for one another and living by his standards, the professor labeled God as a mythical character who took sadistic pleasure in obliterating people in fits of anger, inflicting suffering and burdensome rules, punishing the victim instead of the perpetrator. The accusations went on and on. Kenzie continued to read the professor's words. "The universe we see and study has the exact features we should expect if it evolved without any purpose or design, but rather came together through remarkable random occurrences that led to the increasing complexity of life." "No purpose?" Zahir repeated despondently. lying back down. But how can anything that functions well just happen without a plan? Our boats and our go-karts all required planning, a lot of experimenting and careful work. I agree, Uncle Louis piped up. And our miniature world required years of planning, research, and design on the professor's part. It didn't just come together on its own. I remember the daily reports he gave me. It was an intense effort. As Kenzie continued to read, he came to a section where the professor referred to various fables about the beginning of life, saying, "In reference to the book that has beguiled many in the past, it would be an exaggeration to state that the Bible is evil. Instead, it is a bizarre compilation, as you would expect from a ragtag group of authors composed of many violent and immoral tales. Some are idealistic and perhaps comforting, like a good fairy tale, while other accounts are so unbelievable that it is a wonder anyone has been foolish enough to think they could occur. For instance, whenever has one man's voice parted the depths of the sea in the middle of the night so that millions of people could walk across dry ground to the other side? Anyone with a high school education can appreciate that such a scenario is well beyond the forces of nature, as are many other similar accounts of miraculous occurrences recorded in the Bible. It is obvious that these stories have been fabricated in order to elevate God to the realm of the supernatural, which has misled so many naive followers to believe he was worthy of worship and submission. However, to be fair, centuries of revisions, translations, and attempted improvements have no doubt caused these stories to evolve fantastically beyond the original accounts. We have no idea if what we read today is even close to the original manuscripts." "Oh," Zahir said, sounding deflated. "So what we just read in Genesis may not be the actual words of God, even if he's real? The Bible has been changed over and over?" "Those are the questions we need to answer," Uncle Louis replied. "Is this accusation against the Bible based on true facts, or is it perhaps an exaggeration?" "I'll write it down," Amy offered, running to get her nurse's journal and a pencil. When they finished the professor's first chapter and had written a few more questions, Amy remarked, "This is not a happy book. I don't feel excited to read it. I feel disappointed and sad." "Me too," Zahir agreed. "Kind of depressing," added Ponzi, who had managed to stay awake. "I promised I would give you the opportunity to hear both sides," Uncle Louis smiled. "There must be some reason the professor has such a negative view of God and the purposelessness of life. We need to hear him out." "Maybe he explains it later on in the book," Kenzie piped up. "This is only the first chapter." Outside, the sky was darkening and a beautiful sunset was glowing across the lake. They could hear several tinies swimming in the water. Laughter rang out across the hills. Around the window in the crisis room, the solar lights came on automatically, illuminating everyone with a soft glow. "I suppose the others will be coming home soon," Uncle Louis considered. "Maybe we should stop there for the night." "Please, can you just read about Jesus until they start coming in?" Zahir begged. "Why don't we take a quick break?" Kenzie suggested. "I'll get the three of you ready for the night, and then we can read for as long as it's possible." "Sounds great," Ponzi agreed wearily. "I'm so tired. I just want to sleep." Kenzie's idea was adopted. Amy left the room to watch the sunset outside, while Kenzie helped the patients walk around, stretch their sores, and get ready for the night. Hoping to sit on the swinging bench, she was surprised to see that Santa and Lima were already there. "You're not go-karting tonight?" she asked. "No," Santa replied sheepishly. "We were just enjoying the view." For a moment, Amy wondered if they had overheard their book-reading discussion. She decided not to ask, thinking, "I hope they have been listening. I wish I could invite them in." There was another loud crash in the forest. "It sounds like Odin is busy in the fun forest," Amy stated with a smile, sitting down on the deck beside her friends. "Maybe he's making something good." Chapter 20. Pairing Off. Pointing to the list on the student information system that same evening, Evan was eager to show the professor his final marks. He had an average of 91%. "Ooh la la," the professor smiled, clapping Evan on the back. "You're that much closer to your master's degree." Yes, I am, Evan agreed, as they both walked over to the dome. Perhaps only one more semester to go. And then you can do research for the Greenville University, right? Professor pleaded. I need you here as long as this project continues. I'm fully committed, Evan assured him, as they stood side by side in front of the large terrarium. They glanced intently at one another. The professor couldn't imagine running Paradise without Evan's assistance, and Evan knew he could never leave the Tinies until the project had come to an end. They were both staying. Have you made any progress with the fish eggs? The professor inquired, walking slowly around the lake toward Rainbow Hill. No, I've given up, Evan said quietly. But then he knew he had to explain. You see, Jax, he said hesitantly, I'm not interested in this type of genetic manipulation anymore. We both realize our Paradise project isn't ethically sound because it is a social experiment based on personal motives. Even though we hoped it might benefit the human race at the start. That's why we had to keep it hidden and why we now face serious consequences for our actions. Over the past few months, I've become convinced that what we've done was morally wrong in God's eyes. I feel guilty for my involvement, even though I didn't fully realize at the start that it was wrong to tamper with God's creation. I've apologized to God and asked for his forgiveness. What are you saying? The professor remarked in dismay, even as he felt a twinge of conscience himself. Evan, how far will this go? You're getting mixed up with very delusional ideas. I'm letting the evidence lead me. Evidence, the professor retorted. Having watched a scientific documentary the night before, Evan felt he had another appeal to make to his mentor. Macroevolution is not science, he pleaded. It is a theory of history. Creation is also a theory of history. There may be scientific facts put forward to support both theories, but in the end, evolution and creation cannot be experimentally proven or repeated. Therefore, I would argue that macroevolution is not true science. Let's face it, Jax. You can't breed Cocker Spaniels and get back to wolves because there's no genetic information left to revert back to the wild. It has to be reintroduced. You and I both know that mutations do not add new, useful information to DNA. Information can only be lost. With enough time, I'm sure that good mutations do occur. Enough to account for the vast variety of life we see all around us, Evan argued. And how did so many species survive while waiting for the next mutation to be beneficial and functional? Jax, think about it. There's remarkable forethought and anticipation in nature. There are systems in place to repair and protect every organism from accidents, disease, bacteria, and viruses. Can evolution, a blind, random, unintelligent force, anticipate the need to repair and create internal defenders? Everything we study speaks to an intelligence far beyond any human ability. "'Tis supernatural," Jax muttered, unwilling to show the deeply disconcerting effect that such arguments were having on his mind. "I don't believe in the supernatural." For a few minutes, they both silently walked around the dome, observing the beautiful world they had put together. They saw Kenzie helping Ponzi down the stairs toward the outhouse. Zahir was walking slowly behind, but on his own. Suddenly, Evan noticed a large swath of trees that had collapsed on the far side of Rainbow Hill. "What happened to all those trees?" he said in alarm. Coming to his side, Jax looked in with astonishment. "I have no idea," he replied. "But it looks like someone chopped them down. Who would do that?" They both looked in closely. No, Evan observed. Their roots are still attached. Either they were pushed over or they fell over. "It is the steep side," the older scientist deliberated. "I'll do some research. Maybe they aren't getting enough sunlight or nutrients." Looking closely, he asked, "They weren't chewed on by the deer by any chance?" But there was no evidence they had been damaged by anything. "More wood for Zahir to carve when he's back on his feet," Evan smiled. Hurrying on around the dome, the young scientist noticed that Santa and Lima were digging deep into the ground on Mining Hill. "Looking for treasure," Evan remarked with a smile. Now that everyone has seen the ruby, there may be a few more attempts." "They are in the right spot," Jax nodded. "I hope they find it." "Are we still planning to open up to the public in May?" Evan inquired. "I'd really like to," Jax nodded, looking in on the North Forest, which had lost most of the pines. "As soon as the burn victims recover and the charred debris from the trees have been cleared up, we should open the viewing tunnel to the public." Reflecting thoughtfully, he added, "It's rather strange, but the publicity surrounding the fire and the heroic rescue has raised so much compassionate interest in the Tinies that the governing board messaged this morning to give their condolences and ask how things are going. They even asked if we needed any financial help." "That's amazing," Evan nodded. "It is." With a sudden frown as he observed the forest, the professor queried, "Where are Odin and France?" Outside the glass greenhouse, the sun was beginning to set and the brilliant colors reflected off the water. "I haven't seen them in hours," he murmured thoughtfully. With a smile, he added, "They haven't been complaining or causing trouble lately, and Odin almost completed the stairs before he found the gem. I'm slightly optimistic they are changing for good." "I hope so," said Evan. "I really hope so." Looking around the terrarium, the two scientists noticed that new targets had been set up in the North Forest in the large cleared area where the fire had destroyed many of the trees. The young men weren't anywhere to be seen. Noticing a stash of long, straight sticks behind a tree, Jax inquired, "What are those?" Evan gazed in. "Arrows?" he said with surprise. Then he pointed, "Look over there. They've made some crude bows as well. How did they come up with bows and arrows all on their own?" Running quickly over to his desk, the professor came back with his binoculars. "And those arrows look sharp," he exclaimed. Anxiously, Evan agreed. "I would almost consider those to be weapons." "Ooh la la. We'll need to monitor the situation. Hopefully they are up to something useful." Evan groaned. "I'm not betting on that." They could see Nancy and Milan taking kitchen scraps out to the compost pile beside the store. Rusty was following behind. The deer were running down the hill in anticipation of tasty delights. A bell tinkled as Ripple attempted to pounce on something in the bushes, but she came up disappointed. "Putting bells on the cats was a great idea," Evan remarked. The professor agreed. "Hopefully the rodent and bird population won't be decimated so quickly this time." Coming around Mining Hill, they saw Charlie and Yuyan sitting on the steps of the farmhouse chatting, while Bojo kept a watchful guard against small intruders. Tina and Vahid were cleaning out the chicken coops. Suddenly, Santa and Lima hooted and hollered loudly. Looking over, the two scientists saw they were leaping excitedly around a large object which they had pulled out of the ground. "Is it the sun catcher?" Jax exclaimed hopefully. Brushing off the dirty glass dewdrop, the two tinies were ecstatic. It was indeed the sun catcher. Long rays of evening sunlight sent rainbows dancing in all directions. The loud, happy cheers drew the attention of several other tinies, who left their activities to race up the hill and see what their friends had found. In no time at all, Nancy, Milan, Vahid, Tina, Charlie, and Yuyan had gathered on Mining Hill and were helping to lift the large crystal into a carry cart. With a lot of lively chatter, the heavy gem with the long jeweled chain was wheeled down the hill. "I wonder what they'll trade it for," Evan mused. "It's the best one that we buried," the professor replied. "Maybe they'll get a few months of free meals." But the gem didn't go to the store. To the surprise of the scientists, Santa and Lima told the others that the gem should be something everyone should share. "Let's put it up on Rainbow Hill," Santa suggested merrily. "Then we will always have rainbows up there that all of us can enjoy." The others applauded her idea. Outside of paradise, the scientists clapped quietly too. "I love her spirit," Evan whispered. "Interesting," the professor noted quietly. Odin found a gem and felt it paid off all his misdemeanors. He walked away days after causing that fire, thinking he owes nothing more to anyone, and he didn't even finish the staircase. Santa and Lima find the most valuable gem and want to share it freely with the whole group. They ask for nothing in return. Pondering an analogy, Evan reflected, we gave them those gems, and all they had to do was dig them up. Looking at the professor sideways, he bravely decided to share his spiritual thoughts. In a way, he mused, it's kind of like God's gift of salvation, don't you think? Some aren't even interested in the offer and feel it's too much effort to go digging. Some only think of how they might benefit themselves, while others want to share it with everyone. Evan, the professor called out disapprovingly, you are spending too much time with Seth. Nevertheless, he considered the idea as they observed the large group of tinies march the prized gem across the meadow. Just slightly to the left, Emma, the golden retriever, was lying in the sand, watching her master. In the setting sun, Vinitha and Damien were carrying a surfboard over to Stack and Zahir's creative wooden holder, which now held about 10 sleek boards. I don't see the need to make any promises, they heard Damien say to Vinitha. What difference does it make? We'll stay together as long as we both want to stay together. But it would be so fun to get married, Vinitha was protesting. And then you could come live in my house with me. Why do we need to get married just to stay in the same house? Damien laughed. Because that's what everyone else is doing, she replied. Who says we have to be like everyone else? He argued. If you want me to stay with you, I'll come stay with you. I'm not so keen on hammocks anymore. But is it right? She questioned. There's no rule about it on the board, he shrugged. I'd say we can do whatever we want. I'd like to make promises first, she insisted. Really? The surfer retorted disdainfully. What difference does it make? Vinitha struggled to give an answer. She didn't seem sure of herself, but she was emotionally distraught. On the other side of the glass, the professor observed, it seems like most of the tinies are pairing off in one way or another. Evan wasn't pleased that the professor thought it was okay for the tinies to pair off in serious romantic relationships without making a commitment to each other. I think you should encourage them all to get married before they start sharing houses, he remarked. On what basis? The professor frowned. It's certainly not the norm in our world anymore. On the basis of caring about each other's feelings, Evan protested. You want a world with minimal suffering and no hurting. The tinies need to understand that a full romantic relationship requires loyalty through the good and bad times, and a real commitment to each other. If romantic relationships are treated lightly or selfishly, the worst kind of hurt can result. I think the no-hurting rule is good enough, the professor replied. I don't want to make any other rules. Evan said no more, well aware that he was only the assistant, but he strongly hoped that lovely, shy Vinitha was not going to be badly hurt. In the last few days, he'd noticed the attractive, charming surfer was thoroughly enjoying his sessions with Georgia and Dia, while Vinitha worked alone in her pottery. Somehow Damien always managed to make his lessons full of frolicking fun and lots of laughter. It was a good strategy for keeping his students engaged, but Evan hoped that one guy wasn't going to captivate more than his fair share of the ladies. They were already short one girl. Walking around a Rainbow Hill, the tall student assistant saw that the shining gem in the carry cart was now at the top of the clearing. He heard the tinies deliberate over where they should hang the treasure. Get your phone out, Evan, the professor urged quietly. We should record this. A large eucalyptus overhung the edge of the clearing, and Lima volunteered to climb the tree and wrap the chain around its branches. However, the others felt Lima was too heavy and volunteered Charlie in his place. Amy came running over to watch the proceedings. Nervously, the young farmer climbed the tree and skirted along the extended branch. The chain was long, and those on the ground attempted to throw it up and snag the hook on the branches. Finally, it caught. Bit by bit, with Charlie's guiding hands above, they managed to pull the gem up on the chain until it hung high in the tree. Reflecting in the setting sun, the swinging crystal distributed beautiful colors on everyone's faces and clothing. Amy was delighted. Santa and Lima were enthralled by the bright reds and purples. Clapping their hands and dancing in and out of the reflections, they soon had the whole group singing a happy chant. On the other side of the dome, Evan stopped recording and lowered his phone. He chuckled softly. We need to record some more of their shows, he said. Santa and Lima win the prize for the most upbeat music. We could play their music in the rainforest biome, the professor suggested. It would be perfect. Evan agreed. Treasure discovered in paradise, Evan mused. How's that for a video headline? Great idea, Jax replied eagerly. Let's put that up on our website. We need a good news story. Walking over to the computer, the two scientists could hear the laughter and shouts as the tinies ran around in the rainbow lights. They shared a happy smile.